Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. We're going to talk mostly today about this brewing budget showdown. Kind of gets lost in a way that it's a budget showdown. That technically, this is a this shutdown question that is timed for the end of the month, the end of September, is actually a continuing resolution, because I don't even I don't in I kind of understand it once I think about it, but it's a little unclear to me why we're even doing it, since you have unified government. So why aren't we on regular budgeting? Why are we still doing continuing resolutions? But we are doing continuing resolutions, and because of these rules in the Senate that we know about, you want to do continuing resolution as opposed to a budget, which gets you reconciliation rules and all that kind of stuff that you could just have majority rule in the Senate, which in fact you should have anyway. That because of the rules for a continuing resolution, they need 60 votes, which means that they need 7 Democrats, which gives Democrats one of these once a season, twice a year, something like that, situations when they actually have some power. Where Republicans, if they want to keep the government open, if they want to keep funding the government, they need a non-trivial, more than just one or two senators to make it work. And so you get this very merited pressure from Democrats who've been thinking like, we have been powerless here as Donald Trump and the Republican Congress, with a pliant Republican judiciary, dismantles the American Republic. And now we have a moment where we have some power, where they need to come to us. So what are we going to do? What are we going to demand for this? And as you know, we have had this debate that only really kind of kicked into, kind of really took shape, I guess, over the last 10 days or so. I'll see what Kate thinks about that in a second, about, the timing. But we've known since March that this, that this was the schedule that we are on. We know from that debacle in March that we all remember, which not only had Democrats like literally getting nothing, kind of on an emergency basis, pulling together the votes for the Republicans' bill, which gave Democrats nothing, literally got nothing, was not only bad on that sense, but it was shattering for Democratic morale. I don't think there's any question about that, right? This was in March, so you were, I don't know what, 6 weeks into the new administration. A lot of the outlines of what was happening was already fairly clear. And this was the Democrats' first chance to say, this is not purely your own show. And we know all of that they kind of, not only did they end up asking for nothing, but they had, it became clear not only that the key players in the Democratic Senate did not want a confrontation, but when it came down to the final moment, the clutch moment, and some of the people thought, okay, maybe we do need to ask for something. And there was a lot of fury from Democratic voters. They just hadn't planned it. So it was so even the people who were like, yeah, we kind of screwed up here. We needed to really kind of fight over some big stuff were saying, and I'm not hypothesizing this. I was hearing from some of those people who realized that the whole thing was a mistake and they'd screwed up. We're saying, but it's too late now. We don't have a plan. We haven't prepped a plan. We haven't gotten our supporters lined up with what our plan is. So it's just too late. And that's it. So this debate has rejoined now with the new March. September is the new March, and we're here, and it's not clear what they're going to do or if they're really going to ask for anything. It seems like, I guess, to the extent that we can say there is a plan, a leadership plan, it has been, let's get them to extend these Obamacare subsidies for another year, 1 year past the election, which sounds like something Republicans would want, right? Help them in the midterms, but nothing beyond that. And it is what Republicans want. Not all Republicans, but the Republicans who might lose their seats next year. And because losing control of Congress, or at least the House, is something Donald Trump perceives as an existential threat, I think it's pretty clear to me that they would kind of like this too, even though they're not going to say so. And the idea there is, I think, for Democrats, let's get something good without a fight, because there probably won't be a fight. We can probably get Republicans to agree to this, and that is where we are. And we're going to get into all the other parts of where we are when I introduce my co-host, which I'm going to do right now. Kate, where are we? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean,
That deep breath, that deep sigh. It's the
yeah,
leitmotif of this episode.
right. It does. We've gotten some signs about the rallying around the subsidies thing, right? You have some figures like Elizabeth Warren who kind of went from saying it'd be absurd to contribute my vote to kind of continuing this form of governance to now it's all about the ACA subsidies, right? So you can kind of tell people have been giving their talking points. You mentioned this before we started recording, Josh, but some grumbling from House Republic or House Democrats starting to kind of come up the pipeline, indicating that they're starting to, have a finger in the wind about this is the way the Senate's going. They're going to be kind of dragged along. Because if we remember, a part of the story in March is that Jeffries and Schumer were on different pages about this, right? Like Jeffries held all the House Democrats against funding the government. And of course, it was a little easier for him. Republicans could do it without Democratic votes, so there
Yeah.
was significantly less pressure. But that is what happened in the House. And then, in the Senate, Schumer obviously said, no, we're going to help, fund the government. So slightly different positions there. But I kind of want to get into today, because last episode we talked a bit about the shutdown and how we feel about it, but there are these different kind of permutations of arguments in favor of shutting it down that I want to go through. And then there's kind of just one central argument against shutting it down that I want to get into as well. But with the arguments for it, there are these various kind of buckets. You have the one that is, Ezra Klein kind of wrote about it as one version. Other people have been talking about it too, but it's this idea that it's an attention getting event, right? That the most benefit you get out of a shutdown is it gives you a pretty acute crisis. It's something everyone's going to write about, right? The media is going to cover it. It might trickle out of the bubbles of people who are interested in politics. And that gives kind of Democrats a chance to message against what Trump is doing in some kind of concise, election oriented way. So that's the one option. The next argument is you have a kind of gains oriented shutdown, right? Where you have to shut it down, and the attention and the messaging is kind of a perk, but it's not the end goal. You want to be getting something in exchange for the shutdown. And, there are kind of subdivisions within that about what those things should be. So some people, more of these kind of like centrist voices are saying it's got to be about pocketbook stuff, right? It's got to be Democrats' best issue. So it should all be healthcare focus. So it could be subsidies, it could be, restoring the cuts to Medicaid, like things like that, right? In that bucket. And then some people argue within that you need to demand things that are more kind of directly linked to Trump's corruption of the government. And that's where you get the more, you have to get out of American cities, you have to make laws so this rescission stuff can't keep happening,
Sort of
that type of.
authoritarianism stuff,
Exactly.
anti-authoritarian stuff, right?
Right. So I would say that's the biggest kind of branch within the you have to do this for gains category. So those are our two broad buckets: attention, stuff in exchange for your shutdown. And then within the stuff, you have it should be stuff that polls really well, the healthcare stuff, and then it should be something that's more directly connected to the authoritarian takeover. So those are kind of our broad spectrum of arguments. And then I think most obviously within the attention argument is the counter argument against doing a shutdown at all, which basically goes when you use them to try to exact concessions, that has never worked. It's not going to work this time. Shutdowns are not a good uh, a good way of exacting, policy wins from the opponents. What's going to happen is the shutdown's going to stretch longer. It's going to get more unpleasant. Pressure is going to build, and then Democrats will get fatigued and kind of cave and capitulate at some point in the future, all the while having risked taking an environment that kind of favors them in the midterms and risking that now they're going to take some of Trump's unpopularity and bring that kind of blame and unpopularity upon themselves. So I would say that's kind of the land of the left right now, the debates that are happening there. So Josh, do you want to jump into any and all of that and we can kind of go through it?
Yeah, let me add one more. Although
Oh yeah, go ahead.
it's it, there's so many permutations that it's perhaps this is more rhetorical, but I do think there's a little there are in some of the more extreme arguments, and by extreme I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. They tend to be the ones I agree with, but the more aggressive ones, there are people basically saying we should not allow this form of government to stay open, which is kind of like a not attentional, not scoring some policy wins, but actually we need to close the government down. And I guess in that is to do it indefinitely, I guess. It's not it's not that I disagree with it exactly, but I don't know what the end game is on that one. And in any case, but that's out there. And you see it. It may be that it is more of a rhetorical point made by the two sort of shutdown flavors that you just described for us. But this idea that kind of we have a government that is a mix of abject corruption and sort of slowly growing police state with this, ICE and National Guard and all this kind of stuff. So we should close that down and just not fund it. In a way, that was actually, in Ezra Klein's argument, he kind of made that argument in as much as he argued that we're now in the sort of the consolidation phase of an authoritarian takeover. So you need to slow that down. And the best way you have to do it is to not allow it to be funded. So in any case, I don't know exactly where that fits in. It may be rhetorical more than anything. Uh, I don't know. I think the um, a lot of this comes down to not so much a point of principle, but kind of a logical argument or a syllogism. Uh, if you have an executive branch that is trying to basically do an authoritarian takeover of the government with the other two branches in a compliant posture, um, when you have moments when you can slow it down, should you try to slow it down? And it is very hard to argue that the answer to that is no. And the no shutdown argument is no. Is strange as it may seem, you should actually not try to do that. And there are arguments about, well, Democrats will get blamed or they don't have as good a messaging ecosystem. But how can that can't possibly be the answer. And then another one, which again I'm very favorable to, is you need to you have a divided country right now, where for the moment it's divided against the president. You need to get your people enthused. You need to build up their morale. You need to show that you are in the game, and not have this constant spectacle of power from the executive branch. You need to get the other team into the into the ring. And I think people who don't see that fundamentally don't understand contemporary American politics, that it's all about sort of competitive spectacles of power. And so that's what gets me to they have to have a confrontation. I go kind of back and forth on what the confrontation is over. I actually saw a post from TPM alum Brian Beutler this morning, where he said it's really important. Like, you can't do it on Obamacare subsidies or bringing back the Medicare funding or some other thing, because those are actually all extraneous. Those actually aren't what this is about right now. You have to say you have to say we're only going to fund legal things. So, ergo, you have to stop doing illegal things for us to give you money. And that makes it not the Democrats doing it. That makes it the administration doing it, because they're doing the illegal things. And when I was reading it, I was like, okay, yeah, maybe he's right about this. But then I was reminded, no one cares. No one cares. No, that is such it took me a while. I know Brian. He worked for me for a number of years. I worked with his logic. It took me all that time. The idea that occasional voters are going to that logic is going to sink in, I think when you step back, becomes absurd. So what I kind of come down to is, I think you have to fight about this, and it's almost like I need to leave it up to smarter people exactly what you're going to fight about, but you have to fight about it. You have to fight about what's happening in the country.
Yeah, I think that's the trickiest part for me too, because I feel that to shut it down or to not shut it down is almost like the easiest part of the equation, in my opinion, because just lending your votes to funding what's happening right now feels almost like against the oath you take as a member of Congress. It feels unbearable to me. But then the question of what's next is just, it's definitely the harder part, right? Because it
Yeah.
entails some amount of you need to have a strategy that keeps Democrats on board even when things get painful, right?
Yep.
And even when, I mean, obviously, as we discussed last episode, Trump has like slashed so much of the federal government that I think some of the usual anti shutdown arguments don't apply so much here, kind of like the tumbleweed in the national parks and pinched federal workers. It's like, well, don't have to imagine it, right? Like we're there already. But
Right.
you
Right.
know, but okay, but imagine a world like that. Imagine airport delays because workers aren't getting paid and they're not coming to work. Okay, some amount of like diffuse pain caused by the shutdown. And even if you don't have that tangible pain, the right wing and mainstream media are already set up to blame Democrats, right? Kind of because they would say Democrats are shutting the government down, right? And you could go until you're blue in the mouth or blue in the face about, Republicans control the trifecta. And I'm not saying that messaging would kind of work on everyone, but that would be the framing. Democrats are shutting it down. So you need to kind of have the courage or the faith that the public will not blame Democrats long term. And I do think there's some like historical evidence for the argument that these things generally don't last until we're so far away from elections and our attention spans are so short these days.
Yeah.
That could be a counter argument, but you need a strategy that will hold squishy lawmakers together for an undefined amount of time for concessions that you are probably unlikely to get. Like Obamacare subsidies, maybe, right? Because it's in Republicans' best interest. And it's kind of crazy to me that it's so clearly in their best interest. And
Yeah.
still, so many of them are so reluctant to do it, right? I mean,
Or
with
that
the whole.
Democrats are so interested in doing it.
Oh, I know. And this is part of it that I do think is worth talking about. Like, I think it's a good instinct that Democrats like want to protect the country from Republican policies that would hurt especially the poor and the vulnerable. Like that is what you want. But sometimes that just has the effect of like letting Republicans do horrible things and then also insulating them
Mhm.
from the public reaction to those
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
which is part of why the Obama subsidies thing is so galling, I think, to both of us. Is like, first of all, you're getting it on some kind of short-term basis, right? Which sucks, which means it's like a totally fleeting and ephemeral fix to this problem. Second of
And
all,
purely to help Republicans survive the midterms.
right, that's the thing. It's just
Yeah.
you're protecting them from their own politics, At some point, it just feels like if they want to take away healthcare from 4 million people, it's tough to swallow and you don't want people to suffer. But if you bail them out, nobody is ever going to punish them, right? And normal people are going to have no idea that it was you, the Democrats, who kind of saved them from this Republican malice. They're probably not going to know that anything happened
Yeah,
or
exactly.
credit
It won't even,
Republicans for fixing
yeah,
it, right?
it won't even be that they'll credit Republicans. It'll just be that it never happened. It never, I know someone who works for uh, a company that basically services Medicaid, right? Because a lot of Medicaid, you are not getting a check from something that says Medicaid. You're getting various kinds of healthcare services that are upstream being paid by Medicaid. Blah 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 blah. Okay, so this company is now in the process of telling its customers, technically, are they customers, whatever, telling their customers, look, starting on this date, we're not going to be able to provide this service anymore and stuff like that. Okay. And so what they're hearing from what they are getting the shocked responses from the people who they provide services to. And what's interesting is that it's not that these people, who by definition are going to be people of limited economic means of various sorts, it's not that these people like, wait, cuts to Medicaid, I didn't hear anything about that. It's that, yeah, they heard it as part of the political conversation. But since it's the political conversation, they didn't think it's real. They think it's just politics, and all politics is bullshit, right? And that's very interesting, right? It's not it. Sometimes when Democrats hear these stories, it's sort of like, and this is just for some context, this is in a very red state. So a lot of these people are going to be, lower middle class, working class, or on various people on various kinds of disability, white people. You know, these are working class whites in a red state. So these are people who like overwhelmingly voted for Trump, right? And when people hear these stories, Democrats hear these stories, it's all, oh, I didn't know the leopard would eat my face, blah, 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 blah. It's not quite that. It's that it's part of the political show, and that stuff's not real. And they're sort of shocked when like, wait, that's actually going to happen, right? So whatever metaphor it is, Democrats are not going to get any credit for helping head off cuts that people either had never heard about or didn't think were actually going to happen or whatever. One thing I'll tell you this though, and this kind of goes to my sort of core thinking on this. Most of our listeners would probably be familiar with Punch Bowl, sort of it's been around for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, maybe 5 years. The latest incarnation of the Politico Axios, kind of digital media era insider, DC sheets. It tends to be very Republican. It's not right wing, but very, as most DC media is, very immersed in Republican assumptions. Okay, so this morning they had a newsletter about what we're talking about now, about this question of what's going to happen at the end of the month with the continuing resolution. And the specific thing was that House Democrats are now starting to get pissed because they feel like they are going to get either sold out by Senate Democrats, picking your metaphor, either sold out by Senate Democrats or just dragged along because they don't really have any power here. They are sort of on the line for whatever decision Senate Democrats make. And even though they have no control over that decision, ordinary Democratic voters who hate their party and think their elected officials are useless are going to say that about House Democrats as much as they're going to say it about Senate Democrats. Okay, so that's the topic of this whole thing, this whole newsletter. And the authors of the newsletter are sort of running down the different asks. The ask for Obamacare subsidies, the asks for take the soldiers out of the cities, blah, 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 blah. And they just sort of like offhandedly say on most of these, obviously Republicans will never agree to anything like that. So it's then kind of, which Democrats will how are Democrats going to get behind something that obviously Republicans are never going to agree to? This gets you to the core issue that Democrats, the core problem that Democrats have, that Republicans have made clear over many years. They are absolutely inflexible on many issues. They don't care about the consequences. They are absolutely inflexible on those issues. Democrats don't have that. This whole debate is whether they will do anything because they're worried about whether they'll get blamed or this or that or the other. And that is this whole debate. And part of, I think, what a lot of us are talking about here is you need to start to change that equation. You need to have the other side worry about, wait a second, Democrats will never agree to having these Obamacare subsidies cut, or they'll never agree to more funding unless you revise the law to make it more clear that Trump can't invade cities. That thing shapes all of this, and it will shape it even deeper if you end up, as I think you probably will, uh, just for some mini agreement to, on the Obamacare subsidies or the rest. Uh, that's how that to me, that is the most instructive way to see this whole question. Kind of exactly what you fight about and stuff is you know kind of secondary. You need the other side to think, but they're never going to agree. So why are we even talking about it? Since we know they're never going to agree. Anyway.
Yeah, I also think the other key part is just whatever you demand concessions wise, it's going to be a big messaging opportunity and a big messaging feat, right? To keep attention trained on this for X amount of time, to
Hmm.
kind of have the winning argument over what Republicans and kind of the mainstream press are saying. Um, and that is where I actually think the rub is, because it's kind of easy to see a lot of this being successful, right? If you go the healthcare route, you can also kind of wrap in his corruption. He's cutting your healthcare to do tax breaks for the rich, blah, 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 right? Like there's a lot of way to kind of hook that into Trump as bad authoritarian and not just the non sequitur kind of kitchen table issue thing. Or if
Right.
you go the more explicitly authoritarian route, it's the whole we will not participate in kind of the weaponization of our government against our own people like this. Those are, it's not hard to craft a compelling argument out of either of those approaches. But I think the key issue here is just, does anyone have any confidence that the Democratic leadership right now could make those arguments in a compelling way over some indefinitely long period of time, all the while outfoxing the very loud megaphones who will be saying day in, day out, this is Democrats' fault, right? We got it baked in that Republicans don't like government. Democrats are supposed to be the ones who like government, eh, so forth and so forth. And it's just, I th- you can't look at the way Democrats are calculating right now and not kind of see their own lack of faith in their messaging ability baked in right now. I mean, that's part of why there's been so much debate over what tangible concessions we should fight over,
Yeah.
because as soon as you land on the okay, what next, right? What's the plan going to be? What's the strategy going to be? The Democrats themselves, the elected Democrats themselves, I think, have very little confidence in their own ability to kind of pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, those who aren't watching the video version of the podcast, I'm sort of laughing as Kate says this, because I agree. Because one of the core strategic arguments is, but we suck, so we're obviously not going to be able to sustain that. Um, but this does get to a pretty key point, and in a way, it goes to the strength of a form of the healthcare argument. I did a post a few days ago, which said there's a sort of an unspoken part of this that is really the key to everything. The current plan seems to be, in advance. I'm Chuck Schumer. In advance, we're going to cut a deal over these ACA subsidies. We're going to get something that's tangible. People who have health care for one more year. We're not going to have a shutdown. We're going to move through. We're not going to own the shutdown. We're not going to take partial ownership of whatever downturn, economic downturn there might be, blah, 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 blah. Great. Okay. And so a lot of people, I think for good reasons, are saying this is consultant speak. Oh, pocketbook issues, kitchen table issues, blah, 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 blah. Kitchen table issues are actually very important. Um, The other criticism being no one's even going to know you did that. So yes, it's great for some people who will get health care for one more year, basically as a GOP campaign expenditure, right? But it's not really going to do anything. But what you there's a different way you could sort of focus everything on healthcare, which would be to say you just did this thing of you basically gutted Obamacare, you cut like $1 trillion from Medicaid. If you want our help, you got to put those back. Now, are are is are Trump and the Republican Congress basically going to undo the BBB, their sort of central piece of legislation? Oh, I guess we've got to just undo all. Well, probably not, and probably you have a shutdown for a few weeks, and eventually Democrats are going to say, "All right, they're never going to do it," and you sort of give in. But in that case, you have had people are already against these cuts. In that case, you will have, I don't care what kind of messaging infrastructure you have. And probably people will think the Democrats decided to shut down the government, but they decided to shut down the government because they wanted to force Trump to give everybody their health care back. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. That is a really loud month-long commercial that Trump took away everybody's health care. Democrats are shutting down the government to try to get everybody's health care back. Now, again, maybe Joe Rogan and Twitter and the rest of the GOP machine will sort of blame the shutdown on Democrats, but like, did the Democrats sort of like kind of throw down the gauntlet and say we want everybody to get their health care back? That works for me. Even if you don't win, that's powerful. And maybe you don't win, but that's going to break through, and there won't be any denying what they're demanding, right? So I don't know.
And there's also a different way that story ends, which is the shutdown is dragging. Democrats every day are saying, I will not participate in cutting Americans' health care. I won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Senate Republicans change the rules, right? Get rid
Yeah.
of the filibuster,
Yeah.
make some kind of
Great.
filibuster carve out,
Awesome.
which, as we've discussed before, might that come with some short term pain? Yeah. Like, might that come with scary Republican legislation? For sure. But you have there's just we're at a juncture where it's ridiculous to support the filibuster, even if it means they might pass a national abortion ban, because again, Republicans cannot keep being insulated from the results of their legislating. B, we've talked 100 times, the filibuster hurts Democrats so much more than it hurts Republicans, and I think that part of the wilderness Democrats are in right now is just directly traceable from the filibuster, both in terms of some guardrails that could have been put up against Trump that failed because of, Manchin and Sinema or whatever generations of squishy Democrats before
Yep.
them, because we've had year after year after year where Democrats just fail to deliver on like fundamental ideological promises to the base because of the filibuster. I mean, it's just, you have to swallow the short-term pain for the long-term gains there. And so if that's what this ends in, I think it's a net gain, even if it's kind of scary in the short term.
Yeah. No. To me, great. It's as you say. It has downsides, but the big side is much better because when you get back into power, that one's already done with. That's already been taken care of. At the moment, I would like to think it won't be, but at the moment, that's the first order of business. Are we going to get rid of the filibuster? The premise of being able to do anything. So if you can just sort of like remove that from the equation in advance, awesome, awesome. I'm totally for it. And frankly, this is actually why. Could it happen? Absolutely. But I'm actually kind of skeptical, precisely because it helps Republicans so much more than it helps Democrats. And without it, you are going to start having Republicans pressured to pass national abortion bans and all sorts of laws that are super unpopular. And again, this is everything about. There's so many things that have gone wrong in this country over the last 20 years. But a huge, huge, huge part of it is that Democrats are the party of civic democracy. And we have had numerous examples over the last 20 years where you have an election, you know, people say, elect me and I will do X. They're elected and X doesn't happen. And to some extent, you can say, well, that's because the politicians were phonies or they were actually owned by big money and all these kind of things. And yeah, there's some of that, but the real functional thing is that there's the filibuster. And to a certain and over time there's been a more and more aggressive Supreme Court. And so you have situations, set aside what you think about student loan debt relief. You have things like, Biden comes into office. He's gonna do debt relief. He does it, and then the Supreme Court comes up with a reason you actually can't do the debt relief. Okay, and people who are really into politics and stuff, and say, hey, he did it. Take it to the Supreme Court, and that is all true and everything. But it's also true that at the end of the day, you say you did it and you didn't get it done. And that's, people talk about, oh, why are Democrats so unpopular right now? I think it's the comeuppance of a lot of, you said you do X and Y, and those things just didn't happen. And the fact that they didn't happen because you've got a sort of, nihilistic, authoritarian, former center right party of government who broke everything. At a certain point, people are saying, well, okay, yeah, but so I guess there's no point in voting for you since everything's broken. You can't do anything. And that saps everybody's confidence. That saps everybody's belief that there can be change. That saps everybody's confidence in civic democracy.
Right. And I think the other piece here before we move on is just what happens if you don't shut it down? Okay? Like, say, what if you don't even get the subsidy deal and your options are just nothing or shut down, right? And they don't shut it down and they lend their votes and whatever. The demoralization of the base that kicked off in March is still so potent a force in our political landscape right now. And then I think the arguments against shutting it down were a bit stronger than they are today.
Yeah,
Because
they are. They were.
then they argued, we're just at the beginning of this Doge stuff, right? Like, we don't kind of want to make it easier for them by having all these people be furloughed. And then they just say, hey, you're gone permanently, right? They felt that they were still winning in the courts then because nothing had really gotten up to the Supreme Court, and you don't want to hamper the court's operation at all. There was also, I think, the piece where they wanted people to feel the unpopularity of what Trump was doing. And they were afraid that if you shut it down, some of that blame gets diffused, right? It might kind of take the onus off of Trump. As to the Doge piece, right? We have found you do not need a shutdown. It is very easy for them to do. And in most of the cases, it's legal. In the ones where it was illegal, it's quickly becoming legal. In the ones where it's still illegal, they just don't care, and there just seems to be almost no repercussion. On the court piece, you can no longer live in any kind of delusion that the judiciary is going to save us here, right? Like, we now just have such an abundance of evidence that the Supreme Court is going to give Trump largely everything that he wants, and it's still crazy to me that there are some legal observers will say, like, no, they've actually batted him down a lot, kind of thing. Like, come on the big ticket federal government changing presidency as king issues, he's lost not at all. And if he does, it's these little piecemeal cases, right? And that kind of segues us to the other thing we want to talk about, which is also, a piece of the shutdown, which is we have our first kind of response from the Supreme Court on this pocket rescission gambit, which we talked about last week. But just a reminder, this is when just the president, the administration kind of unilaterally says, no, I don't actually like that appropriated funding. I'm going to zero it out with this one weird trick of waiting till the end of the fiscal year. It's just like, it's totally patently ridiculous. And yet, the Supreme Court on Tuesday froze a lower court judge's order saying, no, these funds are appropriated. You have to, these funds have to be spent. They have to be released. They froze that order, until they can kind of make the final decision. So it's a preliminary attitude, right? It's not a final ruling, but it signals pretty clearly that at least in this early juncture, they are positioned against that lower court judge's ruling, which means they are likelier than not to approve this pocket rescission thing, to say, hey, actually, despite not just precedent, but our entire system of separation of powers, we're going to okay this. We're going to let the president unilaterally decide what money should not be spent over the will of Congress, which has got to be another layer here, right? Because it totally takes out the old Schumer argument of, the courts will save us. This order, by the way, being signed by John Roberts, this wasn't an Alito joint. And also, just if you're a member of Congress, I don't know how you can kind of, like, at this point, just play pretend in the appropriations process, knowing that the executive can renege on your deal at any time, that no concessions you get are safe or permanent. When the system is that irreparably broken, or at least irreparably until there's new, leadership, how can you just kind of play along as if things are normal?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously we know how Republicans can, because they're the Trump party, so it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Um, this gets to a whole other thing, which is that the power of this majority in the Supreme Court has to be broken, and that is a whole other thing. And honestly, one of the and this maybe gets to be a kind of second order argument, but one of the reasons I think that Democrats, I mean, I say they need to fight when I kind of don't think they will. But one of the reasons they need to fight is that you need to get those, start exercising the muscles that you are going to need to use when I think Democrats will at least control the House in a year and a half, or whenever it is. And then what happens in 2029, with a new set of leadership all around, because you will need to get rid of the filibuster. You will need to break the power of this Supreme Court. So, and those are big things. Filibuster really isn't. That's stupid. That's just a kind of a perversion, right? But breaking the power of that Supreme Court majority, that's a big deal. But everything else is nothing else matters as long as you have a Supreme Court that says that Republican dictatorship is consistent with the Constitution. Capital R Republican. right? I mean, if the president can just not spend stuff that he doesn't want to, then Congress is I guess in theory they still need to appropriate the money you want, but in practice nothing matters at that point, and that has to change. And so you've got to be willing to be as ruthless in favor of the law and civic democracy as Trump has been in favor of authoritarianism, or there's kind of no point to any of this. And I know those are I don't know, kind of strong words. Maybe they seem like trash talk or something like that. But the system that all of us grew up in, I don't know, unless you're like 7, maybe we have some very young listeners. The system that all of us grew up in has been shattered. It really does not exist anymore. You step back, and it is a kind of a basic question of public policy whether the president is ordering the military occupations of cities that are controlled by the opposition party, or whether the federal budget actually matters, whether the Congress actually controls what money is spent on. And then as a, kind of an additional matter of that, whether any of the laws that Congress, non-budgetary laws that Congress passes, the president has to follow them. Those are all out right now. And they're not going to, sure, if you have a Democratic trifecta or Democratic president, they can sort of follow those things as a matter of courtesy. But that only means you have sort of like limited government under Democrats and authoritarian government under Republicans, which very literally makes civic democracy into a joke. It makes it an emblem of weakness, of impotence. So the only way we are getting back from this is to be able to reinstitute these. Let me take that back. It's not even a matter of reinstituting. You need that old system is shattered. You are not going to unshatter it. You need to build a new system in which it is not the case that the president has powers limited by the Constitution unless he really wants to do it, which is kind of where we are right now. That's that kind of in all of these Supreme Court decisions that we're talking about, it's basically, they're not saying this explicitly, but kind of like, I don't know, maybe it'd be good if the president did that, but he doesn't have to. We are in a profound crisis in which the system that we grew up in which we were told was like permanent and was why we were, if not better than the rest of the world, kind of luckier than the rest of the world, has been totally shattered. And we're living in a kind of a rump authoritarian system. And we're hoping, based on a lot of smart decisions, that you get back into power and start undoing this. But to undo this, you need to do big things that will scare a lot of people who want to do them. And if you're still afraid you might take a hit for a budget standoff for a couple weeks, you clearly are not up to that challenge. So I think that, the Schumer thinking is, look, he's getting less popular and we're going to have a 2026 election. So as he is getting less popular and making it more likely that we are going to pick up control of the Congress, why are we going to get in his way? Why are we going to upturn the apple cart and maybe change the equation? And the thing is, people don't realize that's actually not a terrible argument. He is getting less popular. But to me, again, it's almost more I need you to show that you can like get kind of crazy and say fuck it a few times and say I'm going to do something that may be unpopular. I may take a hit, but I think big picture it's going to be it's going to move us in the right direction. Because if you're not going to be able to do jack when you're actually back into power.
Yeah, totally agree. And I just think like the worst possible thing is some kind of, if, fingers crossed, knock wood, salt on your shoulder, if we emerge from this, if Democrats are able to kind of get all three in the near future, my God, I mean, pulling that off alone will be kind of miraculous. And then if it happens, and then if we have some kind of, Biden oriented, we need to turn the page type governance, that's a catastrophe, right? That's just some kind of breathing room before the next Republican gains power again, which is absolutely inevitable in a two-party system, right? So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I've been harping on this for ages. This is all should be practice swings because the stuff that's going to be required of the next Democratic majority is so far beyond the pale of anything they're even slightly comfortable with right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they are just, I'm seeing very little evidence of moving in a direction of kind of acclimating to the kind of courage and, ballsiness that's going to be required to enact those reforms.
Another permutation of this is that if the current majority in the Supreme Court thought that there was a good chance that when Democrats came in back into power, they would reorganize the Supreme Court, add members, um, various changes. The point being, break the power of this majority. That would put some real, believe me, that would be in the back of their minds on every decision. Every decision. They don't think it's possible. They think it will never happen. So there is no counter pressure at all. I guarantee you, if that was on the table, we're back in power, 2029. We are going to create a new system where the Supreme Court is more like an appellate court with a bunch of members, and different cases get different groups of judges and all that kind of stuff. And as part of that, we're going to add, I don't know, at least 6 new judges, maybe 10 new judges. All the new judges are on a 10-year term, all the kind of, thorough kind of thing. Believe me, they would be approaching this very differently. I'm not saying they would like change all their minds, but it would be a constraint. And now there's not. And that constraint is good, because if suddenly they want to say, uh, we're not going to agree to everything, that would have a profound effect. So democratic weakness, elected democratic weakness, it's also hurting us right now, because no one thinks there's going to be any price to pay for all of this corruption and all of this unconstitutional governance. And I'm not even sure there will be, because I know these people. Because right now, it seems, because look, maybe they will say, we are not going to fund your dictator style government. So you're going to we're going to pass this new law that says you cannot be sending you can't be occupying cities. You got to vote on these tariffs. Uh, throw in some healthcare stuff and say that's it. We're not going to, and that's the motto. We're not going to fund dictator style government. We're just not. And maybe it drags on for a month and everybody's super mad and a lot of people are mad at Democrats. Like, okay, yeah, maybe it won't go well. Is that gonna mean that like suddenly Trump will get more popular and he'll win the midterms? I doubt it. But you have to be willing to take risks, and they're not, and that is if you think that's hard, try the pushback you will get on trying to reorganize the Supreme Court. Believe me, that will take a majority that just says we are going to do this, and we can do this. It's clear in the Constitution we can do this, and we're doing this, and that's it. And if you want to vote us out in 2 years, great. But you can't remove our judges because that's unconstitutional. Sorry. That's
Totally.
where we are.
And on that note,
yeah, it's been a pretty upbeat pod, so you can thank us for that. But this is where we are, and I think we're gonna, this debate is gonna heat up over the next couple of weeks because obviously it's sort of the whole game. It's sort of the whole game. If there is any, right now we have Donald Trump, not the sort of the swollen, corpulent Donald Trump, but the sort of the buff He-Man Donald Trump, kind of strutting around the wrestling ring, doing those, where they put their kind of flex their muscles and all that kind of thing, and showing how powerful he is, and saying no one's in the ring with me. I run everything, and he does run everything. And the question is if anybody is even going to try to get into the ring with him. And at the moment, it doesn't seem like they will, and that is at least at the congressional level. Governors are a bit of a different story, but that is where we are right now, and we will be back with you, of course, next week, same time, same bat channel. Anything else?
That's all. See you then.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.